to Books in Hindsight, the only podcast where hindsight is always 2020. And we explore the great books, works, and ideas of the century. Now, here's your host, teacher, and author, Matthew Hines.
Hey everybody, welcome to booksinhindsight.com. This is our first episode, so it's kind of exciting. I'm your host, Matthew Hines. Now, if you don't know me, I am an author. I'm also a teacher. I've lived all over the world, and I've written some books about that and other things. So I'd like to welcome you to our first podcast, and it's really exciting. I've got some new equipment here, and if you've been following me on my Deceptions of the Ages channel or in my race for the Senate in Washington State, you know I have a couple of other YouTube channels. And so if you're listening to the podcast, I want you to know that I'm also taping this or recording this on my iPhone so I can post it on my Books in Hindsight YouTube channel on YouTube. So, all right, welcome to the show. Pretty exciting stuff. I am just trying out some new equipment. I got myself a Audio Technica microphone, and got myself my little pop guard and everything. So I hope everything is sounding good out there to you guys out there in podcast land. All right, so let's talk about some of our business items today. The first thing I want to do is I want to send a shout out to I Love Voiceover over at Fiverr. They do, I Love Voiceover does incredible voiceover work, and she did my intro and my outro, so there's a really good qualification right there. So another thing I want to tell you is that this segment today, this segment is about the publishing industry. It's one author giving advice to new authors, and I want you to be aware that it will be broken up into segments. We will start with maybe the first 10 minutes we'll be talking about, whoops, I just hit my mic, probably one of the faux pas of the broadcasting industry. I'll have to be careful about that. So the first 10 minutes of this podcast, we are going to be talking about whether or not you should publish a book in the first place. Then we're going to talk about the normal publishing industry. And finally, we're going to talk about the self-publishing industry and why you might want to choose that as a route, as many have done. And as a bonus, at the end of this podcast, I'm going to give you 10 things that you don't want to do if you are a new author, especially if you are a self-published author. All right, so with all of that taken care of, let's talk about our subject. And the subject is authors and books. Do I want to be an author? Do I want to write a book? Well, I have basically made a checklist of things that you may want to think about in your decision to write a book, and some of these are practical, and some of these have more to do with the intellectual process. You try to decide which is which. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk to you about when you decide to publish your first book is the question that comes into your mind that usually sounds something like, hey, I really should write a book. And I know that probably every person alive who knows how to read and write at some point has probably thought that to themselves, either because of a situation they were in or because of things that happened to them throughout their lives. So that is probably the first question that any potential author or every potential author has ever asked. But there are some follow-up questions that the potential author to be might want to consider before taking the time to actually write a book. All right. So here is the first thing that I would consider when writing a book. First thing is, what is your story? What are you going to write about? Is the story going to be interesting to other people? Is it going to be helpful to other people? Or in other words, is this something that people are going to want to pay money or go to the library to read? All right, so the next question you want to ask yourself is, what are my qualifications to write this story or this book? Maybe you wrote something in high school, or maybe you wrote in college. But the question you want to ask, has anybody ever read anything that I've written? Has anything I've ever written been published? And so that is a big factor to consider, because based on your answer, you may have less or more work than most. Okay, another question you might want to ask yourself, and this really helps for authors today, that makes it easier for you. Are you an expert? Are you an expert in your particular industry? Another thing that might go hand in hand with that is, are you a whistleblower? Do you know something about a particular industry or organization that a lot of people don't, and that would benefit by knowing? Okay, now, these are just some of the things that you want to think about as far as the mental aspects of what do I have to offer. But let's think about the more practical side of publishing. Now, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, how much time are you going to give yourself to write a book? Just consider that it could take from like a week in some cases, but in most cases it takes months and some cases years to actually produce a quality piece of literature, be it or fiction or nonfiction. So of course, I want you to understand, I understand that literature is not nonfiction, but anyway, in case somebody wants to write that in the discussion, don't even start. So, all right. Do you have enough money to put off your work, to put off your job, or do you plan on working through this? And are you really going to be realistic in expecting to write like at nights when you have distractions like kids and meetings and other obligations that you have to take care of? Because I can promise you this, there is always something better to do than writing. I've had this experience for years, and unless you just discipline yourself or are the kind of person that can shut out all of these distractions, working and having a whole life, this is why people start writing, but they never actually finish. So these are just some things to consider, and if it were my choice, I can't block things out. I'm just not that kind of person that can do that. So I always choose to give myself some time to actually write a book, which makes teaching a fairly useful tool for that. Okay. Let's say that we've answered our questions about the practical side of it. If you've answered all of these questions and you say to yourself, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I've got the money. Yeah, I've got a really good story to tell. Yeah, people are really going to like this. Then I would say, by all means, let's think about you sitting down and actually writing that book. So I'm not going to tell you what to write or how to write, but I'm going to give you a little bit of advice as far as your topic. All right. The first thing that you need to understand is, if you look at the media today, what they call the news cycle, what is circulated as information, it lasts about 24 hours. Rarely does it last a week. And very rarely does anything last a month in today's media. So you have to remember that as an author, you're going to be living in the same kind of world. What may be relevant to people today and interesting, like a new book, 3 days from now, people might not even remember your name or the title of your book. So that is a reality that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But things move very fast in the modern media world. So Your book may be popular, and it may last one day, it may last a month, but inevitably it's not going to be anything. And for the majority of people who ever produce any kind of book, they never see that kind of popularity at all. So now that we understand that, and if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the discussion below. But I can assure you that I've been through all of this. So I'm not talking to you as from somebody who is speculating about stuff. I've been through everything that I'm talking about. So let's continue on and let's talk about the publishing industry itself. The first thing that you need to understand about the publishing industry is that it is a business. They're not there to make friends. They're not there to ease your ego or make you feel better when they reject your manuscript. They are there to make money. Now, if the publishing industry sees something in you that they can make money from, then of course they're going to be interested in you. But that happening is such a rare thing these days, and usually you have to be extremely lucky or have a ex-college roommate at Simon & Schuster to get your foot in the door, because otherwise these agencies that sponsor writers and the publishers themselves are just inundated with thousands of letters every day. So you have to understand that. What makes you separate? What makes you special? Why should they pay attention to you? And it all has to do with what they call the filthy lucre. All right. So if you're going to write a book, and this is just my final comment about and trying to give the publishing industry a break here. If you're going to write about a book about your halcyon days on the shores of Jersey, back in the 1970s or 80s, then that might be interesting to a few people, but it's not going to be interesting to a lot of people and across a lot of demographics. And so you need to consider, is this something that a publisher in Los Angeles or an agent in Los Angeles is even going to be interested in? Then you have decided that you have what it takes and you're going to publish your book. And so let's just fast forward and say your book is published and now you want to find a publisher. So the first thing that you're going to have to do is write a query, and that is spelled Query. It is a query letter, and it is basically your introduction. It's basically your 3-minute elevator speech to get your foot in the door. Now, of course, I can't emphasize this enough. You can spend all of the time you want and perfecting your book and making it just right. But if you don't put the same amount of time and detail into the query letter, well, my friends, then you just wasted a bunch of your time. That query letter is the only thing that is the agent or the publisher knows about you, and it's the only thing that's going to determine whether or not they ask you for a manuscript. So what happens is you will submit a query letter to dozens, hundreds, sometimes, if you're ambitious, thousands of publishers and agents, and in most cases, you won't hear anything back. Or if you do hear something back, it's going to take a while. And unfortunately, the fact is, more often than not, it is a rejection letter that says something about we are too booked at this time, or it just is not the right fit for us. So now your heart is broken. But before we continue on to our options, I also have to throw in there, not to put any more of a damper on your spirits, but you also have to consider that in today's politically charged environment, that your content may even be considered politically incorrect, depending on what you're trying to present in your material. So all these things have to be considered now. And we know that some things are just not going to be published by major publishers these days. All right, so we've just talked about just to go back over what we've talked about the decision to publish. Do you have something that is worth listening to? Do you have something, or reading, do you have something that people would find educational, enlightening, entertaining, and that they are willing to pay money to a publisher for? We've talked about the process of publishing, and we've talked about the publishing industry itself and the realities of publishers. Now, before you just hang your head and start crying, I want you to understand there is a light at the end of the tunnel thanks to the internet and companies like Amazon, Kobo, iTunes, and Barnes & Noble's Nook. So what we have now in the internet age is we have what is called self-publishing. So we're going to talk about now self-publishing. And if you've never heard anything about self-publishing, I want you to understand that the self and self-publishing cannot possibly be emphasized enough. Once you decide to go the self-publishing route, you are responsible for whatever the end product is. You become the editor. You become the proofreader. You become the marketer. You become the person who selects the cover and figures out if you're going to make your own cover and how to do that. And everything that goes into that book, that is what you are responsible for now. But that's not completely it. Because that's just getting your book published, and that's really when the whole show begins. Or as Winston Churchill said in the World War II, he said, "This is not the beginning of the end, but it is the end of the beginning." And that's what happens the minute you publish that book and you go live. That's just the beginning. All right. So we are going to talk about now, we've talked about the choices that might lead you to self-publish, or at least some of them. And now we're going to talk about some of the more blatant mistakes you can make as far as self-publishing goes. But before we do, remember this. We're always talking about money, right? The publishing industry wants money. You want money. So let's talk about some of the advantages of self-publishing financially. In this publishing industry, you have to have an agent, and an agent is going to take 10 to 15% of whatever you make. Sometimes they might even take more. So in the self-publishing industry, you don't have an agent. You are your own agent. So you get to pay yourself, and you get to keep the margins, the profits of whatever you decide above the cost of Amazon or Kobo or Nook. They take out a pretty large chunk for featuring your book and helping you to publish it. But the rest of that money is yours. And depending on your marketability and how much you can charge for a book, you are going to get a much better deal financially if you can sell your books through Amazon, iTunes, Kobo, or Nook. So please be aware that is one of the major benefits of self-publishing, but it is also one of the drawbacks, as we're going to see. I just have to check a couple of my notes here. Yeah, so when we talk about the corporation, you being published by a corporation, they are going to spend a lot of money on you. They're going to spend a lot of money marketing your book, publishing your book, getting your book distributed throughout their chain. And if you're going to do a book tour, they're going to spend a lot of money on publicizing that. And so you have to understand that a corporation is going to want all the money back and more that you took out from them, and you're going to sign a contract to that effect. So when you talk about the decision versus self-publishing, where you basically are responsible and it's your money, it's your show, and whatever you make, you get to keep. So if some people might be just so into marketing and sales and things that is a no-brainer for them. They say that is the challenge I want. That is the challenge I meet. I know how to market these things, and I know how to sell things. So I will have no problem marketing my own book, and that is not a decision that is very tough for me. I would never go to a publisher. And many authors today, famous authors, have gone that route and just said, to heck with the publishing world. I'm going to keep my money, or what Amazon and Kobo and Barnes and Noble don't keep, and so they choose the self-publishing route. So, something that you want to think about. All right, so we're about 20 minutes into the hour, so now we're going to talk about self-publishing, and we're going to talk about the actual mechanics of it once you decide that is the route that you're going to take. So the first thing that you need to understand when you decide to self-publish, that you're not publishing one book. Like you might think, oh, I'm going to publish this book here, and I have a couple sitting over there. And you go, oh yeah, I published that book, and now it's for sale at Yahoo. And no, I'm afraid that is not even close to being it at all, because those books that you're looking at, those are print edition books. But you're not going to just have print edition books. You're going to have books on Kindle, or a book on Kindle, depending on your publishing experience. You're going to have a book on iBooks, Kobo, and Nook. I mean, ideally, you can do whatever you want, but if you want to make maximum amount of money, you're going to have to publish across all of these different media formats. And so you have to understand that when you publish, for instance, on Amazon's CreateSpace, which those books behind me were published, you have to understand how to set the margins in the book. You have to do the page numbers and justifications. And basically, you have to become a publisher for a book. And that means that from the first page to the last page, everything has to be lined up. The page numbers, the titles, the chapter headings, everything, the fonts, those are all things that you are now responsible for. And it is a lot of work. So that is just CreateSpace. Then you have iBooks, which is another thing in itself. It's an entirely different template, and it requires that you paste chapter by chapter into it, and you must learn all this different software. And then it repeats across Kobo and Barnes and Noble. So, for instance, CreateSpace requires, I believe, a PDF format. And all the way to Kobo Kobo, which requires a digital book. And speaking of digital, you don't want to forget to understand what digital rights management is, because you're going to be asked, do you want to have this your work, is it going to be available just on a specified device, or can it be shared with the whole world for basically free? And I don't know why people do that, but they apparently do. I don't. All right, so that is just when you get into the mechanics of publishing, you have to understand before you go any farther that you're going to have to be familiar with all of these different platforms. And it's not easy, and it's a very time-consuming experience, and you end up, actually doing some more editing as you go along. And so also I want to, as we talk about editing, I want you guys to understand that before you start doing anything, even before you publish your book or before you start writing your book, look on YouTube and look up as many books on publishing across all the different mediums, I guess, as you can. Because you're going to find out that each video has a little bit of different information. Some of them might be the same, but they all have a little bit of different information that is going to help you, and it is going to help you to create a more marketable and a more professional product. And now remember, you are competing with major publishing houses, so you want to have eye-catching titles and covers and everything that will get your book sold out in the marketplace. All right. So let me just look at my notes here. Yeah, so you just want to see as many YouTube videos as possible. And I know I should be saying, well, you want to read from websites as well. But it's just easier to look at a YouTube video. And if you want to add to your knowledge from looking at a website, then you're welcome to do that. But YouTube generally focuses it because it goes through the process chronologically. All right. I think my nose is getting stuffed up. I'm a little bit under the weather today. I don't even know why I did this. I was just so excited to get my broadcast, my first podcast on the air. So here we are. All right. So we want to get as much information as we can. And all right, so once you've published, and the reason I tell you that you should, this is just one example that I'm going to tell you from my own experience. I've published books all the time, and I always forget to set my indent, right? And if you would look at, I'll post a link in the description. There's a guy who does a really nice video. There's actually a guy and a lady. They have two nice videos about actually publishing in CreateSpace. And every time I do this, I forget to put the indent, right? I forget to put indent, and then I end up having to manually indent. And you know how difficult that is? My books are 500 pages. So I've had some really nightmare experiences. And someday I'm just going to have a podcast where I talk to an author and they just ask me, what are some of the worst experiences you ever had? And I'll tell you what, I've got a couple hours worth of those. All right. So make sure you get as much information as you can before you start writing. All right, so the last thing that I want to tell you before I start talking about, we're about to the point where I think my video camera might turn off. I'm gonna actually stop this for a second and restart it. All right, I just stopped and restarted my my video camera, my iPhone, so I should be able to finish this podcast. All right. So the last thing I'm going to talk about before we talk about the 10 things you don't want to do in the publishing industry, and that is, I want to talk to you about the social media aspects of publishing. Now, I told you that you're going to, I haven't told you this yet, and I must have glossed over it in my notes. But when you when you self-publish, self is the key word. So you're going to be your own IT guy. You're going to be your own photographer. You're going to be your own mechanic. You're going to be your own editor, publisher, proofreader. You're going to be your own accountant. You are going to be everything. You're going to set things up. You're going to take things down. You're going to make bookings. You are going to be your own public relations guy. So you are going to be doing everything. And the one thing that can really help you out is social media. And I just want to go over, I'll give you a couple of social media sites for authors and for books, or actually these are for readers, but authors are very good, or these help authors out a lot, because these sites allow authors access to readers. So here are just some of them. You have Goodreads, which is owned by Amazon. You have AuthorDB. You have Shelfari and Book Daily. And those are the ones that I know. I don't know if they're all still in existence. I do use, I'm on Bookreads, and I've done the other ones, but I had some bad experiences. So I really just like to stick with Goodreads. But remember, the thing that is going to sell your books in today's internet age is the way that they are portrayed in the public, and nothing is going to portray them better, than word of mouth. So you want people to be posting good things about your books, and hopefully giving them the 5 stars and not 2 stars. But I found out also the hard way that no matter what you do, people are just going to be the way they are, and they are just somebody's just not going to like what you did. It's just a fact of life. Some people are like that, and there's nothing that you can do to convince them otherwise. So I want to make one last point before I continue. And that is about the decision to publish or self-publish. And I left this out until now before I go into my 10 reasons or 10 things you don't want to do as a self-publisher or a publisher, writer, whatever. When I first published my book, My Year in Oman, this is back in 2005. Actually, I tried to get it published in 2004. And I waited for 1 year. I had an agent that just loved the book. She couldn't wait to get it in print. And she kept telling me it takes a while, it takes time, so just be patient. Every time I talked to her, she said, be patient. So I let her go for about 4 months. And then I hadn't heard anything, so I sent an email back, and I got a response that said she no longer works at the company. So this company wasted a year of my life, and I was so sure they were going to publish my book and everything was going to be great. And then I was so not happy. I went the self-publishing route, and I was so happy I did, and I have never looked back since. But if you go the self-publishing route, remember this. There is a whole industry set up around sucking the life and money out of your dreams. So you've got to be careful. When you self-publish that book, you are going to be jumped on by everybody who wants to make money from you trying to sell your book. So you have to be careful, and you have to pick and choose wisely. And that's one of the reasons I started Books in Hindsight, is because I want to give new authors and experienced authors a chance to publicize their book and to talk to readers without having to pay and fork out money for them. All right, so let's go ahead and move on, and let's talk about the 10 things that you don't want to do in the publishing industry. The first thing you don't want to do when you choose a subject for your book, don't let vengeance against people you don't like be your guide. And I mean that, period. If you do, you could invite a lawsuit that will not affect a publisher, but it will affect you because you don't have a publisher to sue. This brings up a point. You may want to consider an LLC incorporation for your business once you start to make money. Now, being a whistleblower is one thing. Invading people's privacy for the sake of vengeance and profit is highly not recommended. Number 2, don't quit your day job. We talked about the finance issue before, and I know it sounds cliche, but if you put an undue amount of pressure upon yourself or your family in order to pursue your literary dreams, you're probably not going to be able to accomplish it. Because you are going to put a lot of pressure on everybody around you, and that pressure is going to be focused back on you. And you need all the positives. You need all the good energy that you can find, because writing a book is a creative process, and you need all of the best that you have to offer. So you're going to have to find a way to isolate yourself from your problems, from your life. And if you're not the kind of person that can do that, then you might want to reconsider your decision. Or at least understand you're going to have a very hard time, a harder time than others. All right, number 3, very important also, find people who support you. One of the biggest obstacles to creativity in the modern world is the tendency for us to accept and want to keep the status quo. That goes for institutions, and it goes for people. People don't like to see change, and people don't want to see somebody like you getting rich. So you have to be very careful, because there are people that want to help you to succeed and that want to see you succeed. Usually it's people who have succeeded themselves. So try to find those kinds of people and surround yourself with them. I just want to say that if you find people like somebody who will applaud your dreams, then you have something that is golden, and you have something to help you in your pursuit of your masterpiece. And I just wanted to add, more than likely, these people are not your relatives, so don't even try. All right, here we go on to number 4. And this is very important. Be sure. You have to be sure about everything. Be sure about your title. Be sure about your cover. Be sure about your editing. Be sure about everything. Because once you publish and you go live, if you go back and make changes to things, and I am guilty of this, your readers will be confused. You can make minor changes, no problem. But also remember, you've published across at least five different mediums. So, or 5 different, I don't know what you call them. So you're going to have to go and change 5 different things. Like if there's a word or a paragraph or something that you change in one, you've got to go back and change in all of them. So be very careful and be sure before you go online and you publish that you have everything that is sure. So, and especially when it comes to your artwork for your cover, your prices, and finally your content. Okay, number 5. This goes back to your social media, and we're going to spend some time talking about social media now. You must create a website. That means that you must have somebody do it for you, or you must find out how to do it yourself. People are not just buying the book these days, they're also buying the author. They want to know if the author is credible. Does the author have prior works? Is the author recommended by anybody else? And all this stuff can be featured more easily on a website than on the cover or jacket of a book. Always they are looking for credibility. Number 6, endorsements. Try to get as many endorsements as you can. Rich people, poor people, famous people, doesn't matter. Famous people is always better. But if you can't get them, get endorsements from somebody, because people shop in herds, just like anything else. And if people are recommending a product, more people are going to buy that product. It's common sense. You see it every day in the news. And again, this is why we talk about these author webs or these reader websites like Goodreads and BooksDB, etc. These are word of mouth recommendations, and so this is why these are so important. Of course, that we want to get reviews that are genuine, and we don't want to have reviews from people with the same last name as us. We don't want to have reviews from people with the same zip code as we do, because that really looks like you're using your family and your friends, and they can't really give an accurate, objective review. All right, now, number 7, social media. The number 1 rule of social media, found this out the hard way. I do apologize. It took me a long time to figure this out, because you just don't have time as a self-published author. You're just always going from one thing to another. So don't spam. What is spam? Spam is not only a horribly tasting spiced ham product, it is also when you send an email or whatever and say, hey, I'm having a really good time and I'm reading this book, The Rainier Paradigm, right? Well, that really, you're not having a good time. You're selling a product. So when you see this on Twitter is very prominent with this, as well as Facebook. In fact, most posts on both of those sites are most often some kind of advertisement. So, you need to decide, or you need to divide between your personal stuff, your Aunt Harriet and your Uncle Bob, and your clientele and your customers. This requires not only your own website, but you can't use your personal Facebook pages and Twitter pages for your commercial endeavors. So you need to get that out in the beginning, and it's also not really recommended to have your friends, because your friends know you, and sometimes they try to be funny with these personal jokes that nobody gets but you, and then you end up looking kind of silly. So try to keep your personal friends, the guys you grew up with, the guys you played baseball with, keep those guys separate from the people that are interested in you as an author and a writer of books. All right. I just want to add that I found out that my the customers that I contact and that we interact with on social media actually are very interesting people in themselves. And remember, they bought your product, so you must have something in common, and that's a great base for a relationship. Okay, so number 8 is still talking about social media. Do not get into fights on social media. Now, we know in our current political climate, our president is very good at that, spends a lot of time getting into fights on Twitter. But you as a writer are not going to want to do that, because you are trying to convince people that you are a writer which is above other people. You have big ideas, and you have really good works, and you want to be known through your words. And so you don't want to have your words be cheap shots and things that are negative, even if it's in response to somebody who said something bad about you or one of your works. You don't want to get involved in that. You really don't. For the President of the United States, that's one thing. He's got $1 billion, and it probably helps him to offend people. But for you and I, as authors, it's not constructive, and we want to encourage the human race to grow and to expand and to tolerate each other. And so that is not the best thing to do. If you get somebody on social media or wherever, and they just hate you, they don't like you, they say mean things about you, just be a Christian. Just say, well, that's fine, and I respect your opinion, and thank you for sharing it with me. And what I always do when I do follow my own advice, I try to make a joke out of it. And I've had people say things like on the comment section in YouTube, just some horrible things, and I always come back with, so what exactly are you trying to say? Something like that, because it lightens up the atmosphere, and it lets other people know that you have a sense of humor, you've got a thick skin. People respect that, and they may even want to buy your book because of it. All right, so the next one is not, we're going to get away from social media now. Number 9 is, there is no substitute for accounting. Whether you win or lose in the self-publishing world is really going to depend on that plus and minus column in your account book. So forget being an author, forget being a publicist, forget being a social media person. You are going to have to be a star accountant as well. You're going to have to know tax laws. What can you deduct when you go out to promote your books? You have to know and how to keep receipts. So the first thing that I would start doing is get a book, look on YouTube, find some accounting information. But right now, get a box and start saving your receipts, and take one day every month, get those receipts out, go through them, I photocopy all mine, and then I put the date of the receipt and then what it is, so that everything is just listed by date as I look them up, so I can basically see the story of my life. And also, when you need to have a separate bank account, so don't even start publishing or anything until you have a bank account that is separate from your personal bank account, because those things are going to have to be figured out when it comes to tax time. And my nose is really getting stuffed up. I don't know what the problem is with the air in here, but it is. All right. Well, you guys, I think that I'm going to close this off. I think this is going to be the first podcast. I think it has gone successfully. I'll have to see if my mic worked and if my recording worked, but it looks like it worked on my camera. So I think we're going to have a finished product here. All right, so I want to thank you guys for tuning into the show. You can hear these podcasts on iTunes, and this is going to be featured on Libsyn, so it'll be shared in RSS feeds and wherever that stuff goes. I'm not really sure about all this stuff yet, but I'll get bigger on it. Now, the next show that we're going to do, we're going to talk about my book, The Rainier Paradigm, and we're going to talk about a secret society that is going to or is trying to use a secret weapon in Alaska to detonate Mount Rainier. And what they want to do is kill everybody and resell the real estate. So that's our next show, and we are going to ask the question, the Rainier Paradigm, is it fact or is it is it fiction or will it soon be fact? All right. Well, it's been really nice visiting with you guys, and we'll see you next time on Books in Hindsight. I want you to understand that the first 5 shows will just be me talking about issues like this. We'll talk about the Rainier Paradigm. We're going to talk about the Middle East on episode 3. And the last couple episodes, we are going to talk about what's going on in the government. And in the episode number 5, we're going to ask the question, if we didn't go to the moon, how did we see aliens on the moon? And that's going to be, of course, after we talk about my book, Deceptions of the Ages. All right, you guys. Well, it's been great visiting with you, and we'll see you next time on Books in Hindsight.
This has been Books in Hindsight with your host, Matthew Hines. Please join us for our next podcast and look for our archives on iTunes and go to thehindsight.com. That's HEINES site.com for great books by Matthew Hines and other great authors.